Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pricing Matters. Today's guest is Brian Sharp, pricing practitioner who actually came from the world of sales and marketing, believe it or not. I wanted to have Brian on today to talk about large account negotiation and value estimation. But before we get into the topics at hand, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a sales marketing guy. I started my career in sales and petrochemicals. Somewhere along the way in about 2000, hard to believe, 21 years ago, I found myself at BP, and we became the first buyer of enterprise scale price optimization software. And over the last 21 years, I've moved through a number of roles where I've been head of marketing, head of sales, head of commercial management, chief growth officer for different global businesses. And I've been through that journey a frequent evangelist, buyer, installer, implementer, practitioner of applying data and analytics, price optimization, CPQ in particular, as part of my playbook to drive turnaround and step function improvement and profit in the different companies I've worked for. About a year ago, I left big corporations and operating as a practitioner and decided to go into the business of heading up and leading a company that is a technology enabled profit transformation company. My company is Velo, which is short for profit velocity. We came up with the name Velo in conjunction with PriceFX leadership. So it's an interesting story that we'll get into a little bit later.
All right. Thanks for that background. Brian, we go back quite a ways, and I think we've both seen a lot of pricing optimization projects of different shapes and sizes. And one thing that I would say is a repeating theme in those types of projects when you're using data and you're using analytics to optimize pricing by segmenting your customers and products more effectively and gaining, more profit dollars by providing better guidance into the processes around setting price and negotiating price, is that there always seems to be this feeling or this idea of this by the sales and commercial teams and the executive teams that the larger accounts are kind of almost off limits, or they're snowflakes, right? They're treated as a segment of one. So while the traditional methodology for segmentation and optimization of pricing using data and AI is applicable to the 80% of the customers that it's only driving 20% of the revenue, it's not so applicable to the 20% of customers that are driving 80% of the revenue, or maybe the top 50 or 100 accounts at any given company. And I think you've actually even taken that to the next step with this, taking that 80-20 rule down to the 64-4 rule. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, um, at in my own experience working across companies that had dozens of global business units, so you think about a business unit could be as small as 100 million up to maybe 1.7 billion as a division. When we start analyzing revenue and margin and we're trying to figure out how does the stick break, particularly on customers, what we saw time and time again is this 80-20 in the 80-20. And what we found is that if you multiply 20 times 20, you get 4%. 80 times 80 is 64%. What we found is that almost all businesses directionally have this 80-20 and the 80-20. They have a 464, and that is to say the largest 4% of customers more often than not drive 64% of revenues and margins. And likewise, the bottom 64%, if you can actually say the bottom 64% of customers drive less than 4% of revenues and margins. I was actually speaking to a division president of a business yesterday, and we were looking at their data. And they had a 464. They had a perfect 464 in their head of their business. And in the tail of their business, the bottom 60% of of customers drove 4%. So it wasn't perfect in the last bit, but it's an interesting phenomenon. And as you described, when you're going after and trying to drive data, you're trying to drive profit improvement. It becomes a perimeter game. You work the tail, and price optimization with price guidance, peer pricing analysis, it enables companies to become uber confident, if not omnipotent, in terms of the use of data and analytics, particularly in the tail and the mezzanine of the business. But when you got up to the head of the business, suddenly there's drama, right? The head of sales, the global key account executives, they basically would look at price leaders like me and say, I'd love to have your input, but if I let you in the room, I'd have to kill you. I say that jokingly. And the reason is that those deals are so contextualized, meaning there's relationships, there's issues like incumbency or non-incumbency, there are nuances of the service wrapper around the product offer, there are contracts. Hey, this is our contract business. Go work on the spot business is what we've always heard. And then more importantly, when you actually unpack price in large deals, price isn't even straightforward. Most people think price is setting the price level, but in large deals, you have formula and index, rise fall mechanisms. You have adjustment periods that provide semi-fixed forward pricing. You have, of course, rebates and prebates, and you start getting into a juggling act of what is price. So for all the reasons I just described and what you suggested is that we realized, and when I say we, that the founders of Price FX and I realized that the data and analytics, the power of data and analytics was being pushed out of the room. Even though the data and analytics that are in Price FX are absolutely required and critical for managing large deals, they would just get buffeted outside the room. So the way I posed it to Marchin, the founder and CEO of Price FX, I said your biggest competitor and my biggest competitor to getting use is the head of sales or the president of a business who, when we leave, says, that peer price analysis, all that mathy stuff is cool, but I just got to land the next 3 or 4 biggest deals and I'm all good. I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
So that's when we realized there was a huge opportunity to bring data and analytics to the head of the business in this 464.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of what you're capturing there when you're talking about your background and experience is kind of the essence of that kind of, it can be a bit combative, the relationship between pricing and sales, right? And I think what we're trying to do partially with enabling this process through technology is to foster more of a sense of collaboration between these teams, right? So it's not, that pricing's not the sales prevention team, but pricing is enabling sales to make better decisions and really, getting into that room, right? And adding value and allowing the sales leaders to actually see that value that's being added and doing so in a way that's, all kind of coordinated from going into a negotiation, right? And well understood by the entire team, right? That being the sales, management, the executives, the finance people, the account executives, of course, and obviously the pricing team as well. So having, that's part of, I think, what technology enablement can do is to provide that kind of platform that fosters collaboration and fosters collaborative planning and comes up with a common framework and a common set of language that can be used to foster that kind of collaboration. One of the things that I wanted to also capture was, you talked about how how you and Marchin had kind of talked about this, and he agreed, and I was actually I want to tell the origin story a little bit because I remember us being in Hartsville, right, South Carolina, back in the day, and and having a meeting with the CEO of Sunoco, right, who's one of our clients and who was your boss at the time, right, and really had a great meeting with him about the impact that price effects was having, and as well as the work that you were doing outside of price effects was having on the very aggressive EBITDA goals, improvement goals that he had. And then, that kind of parlaying into this conversation about, that and giving us some exposure into the work that you were doing in addition to what was being done at Price Effects, and saying, we do all this spreadsheets today, and there's really no, software out there that coordinates this whole process and links it into the price optimization and the CPQ and the different systems, that you're talking about in any enterprise like the CRM and ERP systems. And that was really, what I remember as the kind of, the origin story, or the birthplace of this whole joint venture that we have going. But then then I think flew to Prague, right, and worked pretty closely with the product team to kind of get them up to speed, to help them get everything together. And it took quite some time to get this right. And so I don't know what your experience was there,
Yeah.
or yeah.
I mean, the CEO of Sunoco, Rob Teedy, he and I both saw mathematically that there was a perimeter game to driving profit. There's the concentrated mix, the head of the dragon, and there's this long tail. And even across the business like Sunoco, that has 22 global business units, none of those businesses really have a mezzanine. There's no middle class. There's this, if you think about revenues as maybe having the shape of the economy of Guatemala, you've got concentrated wealth or concentrated revenues in maybe a dozen customers. And then the tail, as we described, is as long as you can find. And it's hard to find this mezzanine. And so we were playing this perimeter game really aggressively. Well, the name of the game in profit improvement is confidence. And we know that price optimization, data and analytics gives confidence to organizations to commercially go get the price they deserve. Look, we need to open higher and close higher. That's the whole price optimization game. Open high, close even higher. Everybody that buys price optimization software gets that confidence game. In the head, what we realize that confidence comes from getting a cross-functional team together and assessing differential value and building a value thesis. So what we did with Price FX is we envisioned the tool set that would be required to do differential value estimation software, and we brought that to life. Well, if you understand your differential value, you can't go right and negotiate. You actually have to test that thesis with the stakeholders who are going to be on the other side of the table in the conference room on the day the deal goes down. So a key element of the Price FX value estimation approach and the Velo methodology is having this runway to test the value thesis. Well, the value thesis is just a mathematical storyboard of what our differential value is relative to competition, our clients in this case. And we've suddenly brought a tool, a mathematical tool called value estimation, that allows us to take all that contextual knowledge that used to keep us out of the room and bring that to life. And then now we can see, and there's a visualization, and the customer can either confirm or refute the value thesis. So that's two things. One, that's building confidence. Do we have differential value as we head into a negotiation? But also, do we have negotiating power? Because most companies underestimate, especially if they have incumbency, they underestimate their differential value. They don't capture things, and they don't have the time to validate that with the stakeholders on the other side.
Yeah.
So we find time and time again we're driving confidence and stronger perceived negotiating power.
Yeah.
As we got to the moment of truth, which is when you make the opening on a large contract, you have to have alignment. And you spoke about alignment. If you have an alignment, you've got everybody up to the CEO prepared to go down with the ship. Some negotiations blow up, especially if you're willing to take risk. And so what we've developed in the Price FX tool is the workflow, the automated workflow, the transparency and governance to bring multiple levels of the organization and multiple levels of governance so that they can actually get their fingerprints on the opening call to a negotiation. So those two things at the front, understanding differential value, and at the back, getting alignment, translate to this confidence game in the head of the business, which, as we know, is it's essentially the theme that we're playing with price optimization throughout.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, that confidence in the alignment and having the methodology, to establish it, and using data where it's applicable is all key. And I think, a lot of what on the other side of the table, right, the procurement platforms and processes have sought to do is really erode that confidence and get people to underestimate their differential value and frankly scare sales reps into discounting where they don't necessarily need to, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. I know you have a pretty informed set of insights on what's happened in the procurement realm and how that's kind of evolved over time, both from as a focus area, right, as a profit center for an organization, and the use of technology. Because I think one of the important things to get out of this conversation for the listeners is that, there's war being waged right now, right, and the war is we're arming both sides. We're arming the side that's the vendor side, right, the sell side. But in some regards, we're just trying to catch them up, or maybe hopefully leapfrog them a little bit over what's been done on the other side of the table with procurement software, procurement platforms, procurement processes that are all built to undermine the confidence, undermine the positioning and the alignment and the negotiation power that vendors have.
Yeah, so let's just start with the data. We love data. Process beats skill in large complex negotiations. Nobody has a magic wand. Okay, there is a value to have a skillful negotiator, but by and large complex negotiations play out over days and weeks with a lot of people providing input. The leader is choreographing. You start there. Let's look at the data. 98% of large corporations, the procurement organizations, have a defined, disciplined, structured negotiation readiness process. On the sell side of those same companies, fewer than 20% have a defined, disciplined negotiation readiness process. It's just there's asymmetry there. When you look at the tools, the pay to procure software realm is a $5 billion industry. The price optimization and CPQ software today, the total market values, depending on who you ask, is somewhere around $500 million. It's a 10x increase in terms of the amount of technology that the buyers are deploying. And this is the same company set, right? We've got sellers and buyers in every large corporation. And so what we've seen emerge, especially over the last 10 years, is the confluence of process, guidance, so expert negotiators who are operating as hired guns for procurement organizations to run sourcing events, the application of scenario-based mathematical software specifically designed to pit incumbents against potential entrants to draw down prices in major categories. And not only is this playbook of technology, process, and guidance being deployed in most companies' major categories, they're working through the entire realm of categories they buy against, from janitorial services to the core materials that comprise their product. So what we realized, and what I realized about 10 years ago, was that the other side of the table is better prepared. They're driving a structured process. They've got tools and technology, and they've got third-party guidance. And I started to wonder, what would it, just being a sales guy, I wanted to meet them at this battlefield. I wanted to bring a gun to a gunfight. I didn't want to keep bringing a knife to a gunfight. And that's when this idea of the technology, the process, and the guidance between PriceFX and Velo started fusing, and we decided, well, let's bring this to life, and that's where we're at.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, in so doing, I think now we've enabled at least one platform on Earth that is a complete solution with regards to the analytics, optimization, management, negotiation, value estimation, and really the whole process around managing better outcomes, right? More profitable outcomes for companies, big and small, and that incorporates both that long tail of accounts as well as the head, and the top accounts that get the most attention. And I think one of the things also when you're talking about confidence, and one of the tactics I think that these procurement firms use that we've talked about in the past is getting to the senior decision makers that have discretion or authority around discount, right? And what a dangerous game that actually is. And I've seen that firsthand on several accounts. And I imagine that procurement teams realize, and the data shows, is that when the executives get involved and they have some discretion and authority, that they end up giving more discounts than would otherwise be given, right? Can you tell us about your experience there and what you've seen?
Yeah, so go back to the magic three I mentioned earlier: confidence, perceived negotiating power, and alignment. And doing that against a disciplined process of negotiation readiness. Part of what we have to do in driving a structured process of negotiation readiness is identify who does what. And as you mentioned, one of the things that we consistently advise clients on is take their generals off the front line. Do not put your general in the foxhole. I think Reed Holden called this white horse syndrome. The other side does not need a sniper to take out your business. A private with a handgun sorry to be, warlike and violent, but it is not difficult to understand white horse syndrome or getting your general off the front line if we think about it in traditional historical battles.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that consistently. And there's two things that happen there. Is one, those heads of sales, the general managers, and even the CFO and the CAOs of the business who are used to getting into the mix on these large deals, they now get to do their job, which is actually set guidance and stand behind the lines with confidence and translate the company's strategy into the puts and takes of concessions and whatnot on these large, episodic, monumental deals. It's relieving for them, but we're also allowing them to do their job. At the same time, we're creating the capability for average negotiators, where maybe they were these guys that are in their roles because they're great at relationship management, but not exactly the hard negotiator you'd want. We're able to take those individuals and stiffen their backbone and give them the resolve through that alignment and having the connective tissue in their organization, particularly in terms of the negotiation tactics and plan as we see it in the PriceFX large deal optimizer tool, that workflow tool I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You actually see, what are average negotiators on the deals that matter rise, and actually create career making days where they get the result their company wants and needs, and they're able to bring that to bear when maybe their track record would not suggest that they're a demon at the negotiating table. So we like to think this process, the tools, the alignment allows the average negotiator to be world class on the day that it matters in their career.
In your experience, what kind of results have you seen that customers can get out of implementing this process around value estimation and large account negotiation?
Yeah. So we've managed, using the structured process and the essential tools that PriceFX has brought to life in the cloud, about 450 to 500 large recurring revenue positions over the last 10 years. So think about the floor being maybe a $5 million recurring revenue and the ceiling being $250 million of recurring revenues in a single deal. Most of these deals are 2 to 5 years. There's a few scenarios where companies like to renegotiate every year, but by and large, these are 2 to 5 year positions that are getting negotiated on both sides. And what we've seen across that mix, which is about $10 billion of recurring revenues in total, is an average of about 440 basis points improvement. Now, people are like, especially like the CEO at Sunoco was like, how can that be? They think it's price. But actually, when you get into large deals, it's the whole playbook of pricing. It is price, right? So we're preventing price leakage. We're preventing unnecessary concessions. We're opening higher. We're closing higher. We're doing all the things that pricers think about. But we're also doing it, and we're audaciously asking for more volume. That differential value for us, in many cases, we create situations where incumbents can actually now audaciously ask for volume that they didn't think they deserved. The other thing, which is really the biggest lever, is mix. We get to say, what part of this deal do we want to let go to our competition, and what part of this deal do we want to take a bigger bite on? So when you play the old price volume mix, that's where that 440 basis points are. The two other key value drivers we bring to life are cash conversion. So we're clawing back terms in many cases, but we're also preventing working capital flowing out the door, whether it's in overly generous inventory management schemes or it's just delayed payment. The last one is executive time. We're shifting executives from being in the foxhole to actually directing and bringing to life their business strategy by coaching and guiding better deals. So those 5 things, when you bundle them up, by all rights, it's a bigger amount of latent profit in the head of the business than there is in the tail of the business. And that's the hard thing for many of us to get our head around, that there can actually be more largesse on profit optimization, more largesse on price and profit leakage in the largest deals than there is in the tail. We all know there's largesse in the tail. That's why most companies are making the investment in PriceFX. But it's flipping that on its head, and you start realizing, oh my God, there's this huge upside if we play the perimeter game, working the tail and the head of the business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's been, I think, squarely in focus on the procurement side is the large accounts. And I think that management of perceived risk is part of the reason why there is more opportunity there, right? Because they've historically done a pretty good job at increasing the perceived risk, even when it may or may not actually be there, right? And you can't just go into a negotiation expecting that you're going to get the outcome you want without understanding that what's going on the other side of the table, and understanding the value that you're bringing to to your customers outside of the context of that negotiation. And in essence, what you're doing with this whole approach, and it's the same thing that you're trying to do across the board with regards to pricing, is getting more customer centric, really understanding the unique and differentiated value that you're driving for your customers and how that enables their success, right? And then using that in the context of the negotiation when you are at the table, right?
Yeah,
and I think,
I have a story I can't resist. Last night, working with a team in China that is running the business for a US company with manufacturing in China, supplying to a major customer in Korea, right? Their next door neighbor. When we did the value estimator, the biggest value in this business, and they're in the automotive business, the biggest value is business continuity and fulfillment. That pre-pandemic, that used to just be the ante to the game. Now, by all rights, it's the biggest raise. So what did we do? We actually quantified the differential advantage of our client in their ability to provide business continuity assurance just through fulfillment of a commodity that's consumed as big and wide as you can imagine if you see something like a car that's rolling. And we take that value estimation and now we start looking at the current business, in this case, a customer, and you start to see just unbelievable price power. And the team starts realizing, oh my God, we've been leaving money on the table, even though the business in Korea is quite profitable, nicely, comfortably earning its keep. But you start really putting all these pieces together and you tie the contextual analysis of value estimation to the actual power of peer pricing. And you can see unexpected opportunities to go and capture a bigger share of the value that in this case our client deserves.
All right, well, that's a great story, I think, that captures the value of this approach and how it drives profit improvement for our joint customers. So thank you for telling that story, and thanks for being on, Brian. It's always a pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for listening and joining us here on Pricing Matters.
Thank you to PriceFX.